In September 1972, martial law was declared in the Philippines. The former President Ferdinand Marcos then thought that it was the last defense against the rising disorder caused by the increasingly violent students, demonstrations, and the threats of the communist insurgency by the new Communist Party of the Philippines, the Muslim separatist movement of the Moro National Liberation Front. Under martial law, the regime was able to reduce violent urban crimes, collect unregistered firearms, and suppress communist insurgency in some areas. Now, let us listen to the truth about martial law.
Martial law alone. It is made to appear as if I just signed the decree and said, I impose martial law on each and every one of you. No. I ask the legislature to please pass a law proclaiming martial law because there was anarchy in the country. Now, let me say this. The opposition was strong, and they were members of the Security Council, and somehow they had adopted a resolution which required that there be a unanimous vote for the armed forces to be able to move. And therefore, the armed forces was immobilized. At the same time, I asked the opposition party to come and join me in a coalition government. I offered one half of the cabinet. And of course, they laughed at me and said, why should we join you? We're going to take over the government. By the time you are through with the exercise, you're dead, politically and otherwise. And they refused to join me. I asked the advice of the judiciary. I asked the Supreme Court justices, the Court of Appeals justices, and the members of the private sector. And all of them told me there's only one man who can proclaim martial law, and that is the president. And you are it. You are the only one who can proclaim martial law. This is why I must carry this particular mark in our history. I could not have transferred it to the legislature. Why? Because the legislature did not have the power. What does the Constitution provide? The President shall be the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the Philippines, and he may order the armed forces out to quell any disorder, riot, rebellion, invasion, insurrection, and in case of invasion, insurrection, rebellion, or imminent danger thereof, when the public safety requires it, he may suspend the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus or proclaim martial law throughout the Philippines or any part thereof. What does that provision provide? It provides that only the President can proclaim martial law. I repeat, that is why I had to assume responsibility. And I am not one for shirking duty. The people said there was necessity for proclaiming martial law. And the people said, you are the only official who can proclaim martial law. So I proclaimed martial law. And I sincerely believed that it was necessary to proclaim martial law to install order and stability because there was complete anarchy throughout the country at the time. Now, therefore, at that particular period, what was the status of our government? Our government was immobilized, impotent. The armed forces could not move out. The industry was not at all in any way moving. There was no income coming into government. Everybody was running away. They burned the partly burned the U.S. embassy, tried to burn it anyway. They tried to kidnap the American ambassador. American ambassador was Ambassador Byroad. And they tried to kidnap our foreign minister, Romulo, whom you just saw today. And I told him, you better disappear because I will not ransom you. But whatever it is, they burned the Manila International Airport, they bombed the Supreme Court, they bombed the Constitutional Convention, they bombed the City Hall, they burned part of Malacanang Palace, they attempted to kidnap my children, they attempted to kill the president 8 times. There was, of course, an attempted assassination against the First Lady. You all know about that. And this required that I immediately act on it, and so I...
President Marcos moved the country forward and improved the country analytical history of World Bank. During the time of President Marcos, the country made a step forward from a low-income country to a middle-low-income country. If President Marcos was allowed to finish his term from 1986 to 1992, considering that it was he who won the presidential snap election of 1986, and because his economic policies, then President Marcos would have taken the country to another step forward to become a middle upper income country before he finished his term in 1992. Since the time of the untimely departure of President Marcos, the country had remained as a middle-low-income country. It means to say that throughout the presidency of the other leaders, the poor had not experienced an improvement in their lives in spite of credit upgrades. You know why? Because the oligarchy was restored influence, legislation to favor the interests of the rich. So let us bear in mind that Ferdinand Marcos won the presidential election and became the 10th President of the Philippines. His term was marked with increased industrialization and the creation of solid infrastructures nationwide, such as Luzon, North Luzon Expressway, and the Maharlika Highway. Marcos did this by appointing a cabinet composed mostly of technocrats and intellectuals, by increasing funding to the armed forces and mobilizing them to help in construction. Marcos is also established schools and learning institutions nationwide, more than the combined total of those established by his predecessors.